So welcome to everyone who's online with us today for our webinar. Just one last reminder here before we jump in. If you want to listen in French, pour celles qui veulent écouter en français, vous pouvez cliquer sur le bouton interprétation en dessous de votre écran et sélectionner French ou français pour avoir l'audio en français. And for those who are wanting to listen in English today, you don't need to do anything. The presentations will be in English. So welcome to everyone to today's webinar. My name is Leah, and I'm the Knowledge Exchange Coordinator here at Women's Shelters Canada. And I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. I'm really looking forward to it. I know this is a topic that we get asked about a lot. And I know there's many of you who are really excited for today's conversation. So I'm looking forward to getting into it. I do want to start today by acknowledging that I'm joining you from the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people here in Ottawa. I know we're all spread out across the country. That's the joy of these remote events, and so we're all somewhere different. And so if you want to kind of introduce yourself in the chat, let us know where you're joining from. You're welcome to do so, and that'll be kind of a great way to get started here. And with that, I just want to kind of offer a reflection or sort of connect this to our topic today. I think when we're talking about harm reduction and trauma-informed practice and low barrier access, I do think it's super important for us to be thinking about that in terms of, how do these different practices affect different groups of people differently? What are barriers to access for different people? And so just we can keep that in our minds as we move forward today. So just a few housekeeping things before we really get into our topic today. As you can tell, today's presentation is mostly in English, or is in English. And so if you're listening in English, you can leave your interpretation off. If you want to listen in French, pour celles qui veulent écouter en français, veuillez cliquer sur le bouton Interprétation en dessous de votre écran et sélectionner l'option French ou français. Perfect. And you might have noticed as well, your mic and your video aren't on unless you're a presenter. And that's because, we already have about 80 people online with us today, which is wonderful. It's so great to have you all here. But just to make sure we have the best audio quality, the best experience for everyone, only the panelists will have their video and their mic on. We do still want your participation though. And so you'll see in just a few minutes, we're going to have a poll where we'll ask you to respond to. And we also will have a question period at the end of our session today. And there's also the chat feature that you can use to communicate with everyone. So those of you who are using the chat right now, thank you so much for doing that. Remember that you can change it to all panelists and attendees if you want everyone to see your message, or you can send it directly to the panelists. And so the chat is a great way to introduce yourself, to make a comment, to share a thought. If you have a question for our presenters, we would ask you to use the Q&A box, which is on the bottom of your screen, kind of right beside the chat feature. And you can put your questions in there throughout today's presentations. And then we'll get to them all at the end of the two presentations to make sure that we don't miss anything, we get them all together. And we do ask if you can use the Q&A for your questions. It just helps us keep track. So, as you know, today we're here to talk about harm reduction and trauma-informed practice at VAW shelters and transition houses. We have two fantastic presentations coming up. We're going to hear first from Rayanne Toner and Tasha Duncan from the Central Alberta Women's Emergency Shelter. And they're going to talk about their journey towards becoming a low barrier shelter and some of the lessons they've learned along the way. And then we're going to hear from Erin Paulev from the Shimai Transition House at the Atira Women's Society. And Erin describes Shimai as a no barrier shelter or service. And so she'll tell us more about what that looks like for them. And then, like I said, we'll have a question period and hopefully hear lots of really great questions and comments from all of you who are here with us. Now, just before I hand it over to our first presentation, we would love to know a little bit more about who's here with us today. And so I've just opened up a poll. It should pop up on your screen. And we have a few questions there that you can respond to. So we encourage you to let us know, is your shelter or your transition house, would you consider yourselves no barrier, low barrier, moving toward low barrier, high barrier, and it's totally anonymous, so no problem, but just go ahead and let us know how you see yourself right now. For those who are kind of transitioning towards low barrier or who have made that transition, was it worth it? Would you do it again if you knew then what you know now? And finally, does your screening process for new residents involve questions about substance use and mental health? And we're just curious to get a sense of the room at the beginning here. I'm going to give it a few more seconds for everyone to answer. If you don't see it popping up on your screen, you can click on the little poll function at the bottom. I'm going to give it 10 more seconds for those people who haven't voted. Okay, so great point here. The poll doesn't allow you to submit if you don't answer them all, but the last two may not apply. If the last two don't apply, why don't you click no for now, just so that you can submit the poll. And that's good to know. I didn't know that, so we're all learning. All right, so I'm going to end this poll and share the results. And for those of you on the phone, I'll just kind of review these quickly so everyone gets a sense of what the answers were. 38% of you say that your shelter and transition house is low barrier right now. So that's the largest group. That's fantastic. Pretty close though, 35% with moving in that direction, which is great. I think that's a really good kind of place to be having this conversation. 22% high barrier, 5% no barrier. So we've got a really great range of perspectives here. 71% of you said it was worth it to make the transition to low barrier, which is really great to hear. And 82% said yes, the screening process for new residents does involve questions about substance use and mental health, which is really interesting as well, and something that I think our presenters might touch on a little bit in their presentations today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Rayanne and Tasha for your presentation. I'm just going to open up your presentation here and pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Leah. So my name is Rayanne Toner, and I'm the Executive Director of the Central Alberta Women's Emergency Shelter in Red Deer, Alberta. And I'm presenting today with my colleague, Tasha Duncan. And Tasha is our prevention and trauma specialist. And also during the time we were doing this change transformation process, she was manager of client services. She's actually now moved into a dedicated full-time therapy position. So we're very lucky to have her in that. So thank you so much for coming today and attending. And I know that we are really short on time, so we are just going to jump right in. The title of our presentation is The Need for Humility in Management, and these are hard lessons learned that myself, Tasha, and all of our management team had learned going through the process of implementing the trauma-informed low barrier harm reduction framework here in Red Deer. I do also encourage, after COVID, if anyone is interested ever in coming to Red Deer and visiting us, our doors are always open and we love connecting with Shelter Sisters, so definitely feel free to connect with us. So we will jump right into our next slide. Chime, chime, turn the page. Okay, and we will jump right in, encouraging change. So Tasha has thoughts that she'd like to share on this, and then I'll pepper in as well.
Hi, everybody. Very happy to be here today. So I will jump right in. So as a part of the project that Rayanne and I were fortunate enough to be involved in, there was about 3 or 4 days of training to begin with that was focused on a train the trainer model and gave an overview of trauma-informed care with focus on harm reduction, as well as policies and procedure, how to go about implementing change within an organization. So we were very fortunate to be a part of that. The big piece that we missed in going into this project was the importance of context, number one, and some of the other points that I'll talk about now. So when it comes to education and training within our organization, while we had that initial training and delivered that to staff, what we didn't realize is that some of our previous focus would need to be supplemented significantly. So almost immediately when we came into trauma informed, we realized that there were different competencies and skills that were required of staff. And so training has always focused very much on risk assessment, safety planning and domestic violence. But what we noticed was also where we really needed a focus was in managing conflict, de-escalating situations, emotional regulation, and really just an enhanced knowledge of trauma. So we had to revise our training program significantly when within a few months of starting this project. As far as the organizational policies, and I will comment as well, these include the written policies and the unwritten policies, which is something that I became very familiar with in my role as I was lead on this project. So when we talk about organizational policies, we started with a complete review for language within our policy, and also recognize that when we looked at the policies that were in place, for the majority of those didn't translate or didn't give an idea of what the practice was in relation to policy. So we tried to revise our organizational policies to reflect the work that we were doing, but also to include trauma-informed language, and also an understanding and awareness of harm reduction and the approaches that are effective there. So when it comes to the organizational policies, we moved really into a gray area of practice, and that was probably one of the biggest challenges across the board for the organization, because there was comfort in having things quite well defined and knowing exactly how situations were going to be managed. So we kind of went into the gray area or immersed ourselves in the gray area. And so there was a lot of learning that went with that. Included in a review of the policies was a review of job description, because when we started to recognize our deficits in education and training, and also the unique competencies required to do this work, just due to the complexity and the intensity of the work, and just the skill set that we have nurtured for many, many years, while wonderful, just needed to be enhanced in some of those areas. So when we look at job description, we actually had to, one of the biggest findings that we had when we started this project was that one of the key competencies or most important things is having the ability to critically reflect on self, also being willing to critically analyze, our practices, our core beliefs and values, our power and our privilege. And so when we came to job descriptions, we had to start looking at what information and knowledge and awareness we needed for staff to bring to the table, but also realizing that it was crisis, and that there was a very unique skill set required to work within the shelter with the changes. So just things like being really comfortable managing crisis on a continuous basis, being able to multitask, being able to kind of function at a pace that really I'm not sure how it's possible to sustain for honest. I did it for 3 years and definitely wouldn't want to do it again. But as far as the new processes that we went into, so from job description focusing on the importance of self-awareness and being aware of personal bias and beliefs was really important. And then new processes. So we revised processes, everything from walk-ins to how we dealt with departures or women asked to leave the program, as well as everything that you can imagine around how we screened and assessed, and then how we interacted with the women and tried to engage when they were accessing programming with us. So it was essentially a complete and total overhaul. And while we learned a lot within the process, there were a lot of key pieces that we missed that would have been really helpful to us in taking this journey. So I'll turn it over to you, Ryan.
Sure. And just to kind of dig a little deeper into what Tasha had said, there wasn't one single aspect or department in our organization that wasn't touched by this transformation. And that's something not right at the outset of diving into our Open Doors National project that we fully realized. So the education and training really, beyond like our core crisis team and our frontline service delivery employees, also had to be extended, we realized later on, to other factions of our organization, housekeeping department, and even having that awareness for fundraising, development, all of those types of pieces. And that wasn't something that we initially had highlighted. The other thing was, during our transformation, we actually started an evaluation and transformation evaluation framework, where we actually looked and connected with researchers to take a look at how the organization was being impacted by the work that was being done and the change. So when it came to processes, at one point in time, we literally were popping up beds in every single space of the shelter, because once we shifted to low barriers, our capacity level changed drastically. And I will talk about that a little bit later on in a slide. But what we ended up doing was creating actual assessment space where we could see if we could meet the needs of clients, and also to see if we could support their journey while they're staying with CAWES. In terms of the walk-in and crisis response piece, at one point in time, from May to October of, I believe it was 2018, we had 100 women, unique individuals that were accessing services, who were extremely vulnerable, street involved, high acuity, complex needs, who for the most part had never actually ventured into our service delivery field or spectrum before. So that was very interesting for us. And also too, what we learned in this process was, by not actually doing the deep dive in terms of preparation, a lot of the things that we had to manage, it was in terms of like putting out the fire literally at that moment in time. So had we had the planning piece, which anyone who is wanting to jump into this, please feel free to connect on the planning piece. But the planning, the lack of planning, and then the lack of expertise on change management on the actual management team, that led to some of our biggest barriers in actually transformative change. So we're going to just jump into the next slide, because it does all relate. Chime, chime. So our next slide is around internal, external questions and concerns. So the way that shelter staff had actually experienced the change was actually extremely tumultuous. We had done a variety of surveys during this time, and management was seen as being very punitive. The change was seen as being like top heavy and something that was being put upon, as opposed to something that was being experienced, and expert staff members feeling very alienated. And it was a very difficult time for the organization. During this time, we also too experienced a tremendous amount of staff turnover that we had never had before in our 30-year history. I also too just want to mention, and it links back to the other piece around job description, the emotional labor component. There's no way really, I guess, to measure that, but the intensity of the work that was being done was very different from the work that we had done before in our sector and in our particular community. So if I had to do this again, I would really make sure that there was supports in place for staff around that, clinical supports like around debriefing, and just really being able to help them in terms of even more training on core competencies and skills. Because very quickly, for some positions, we were very far out of our scope than we had ever been before. Our outreach staff as well. So typically, our outreach model had looked like we were working with women who were actually at the time like not wanting or not able, or for whatever reason, perhaps just want to stay in their community and still receive services from CAWES. But like I'd mentioned before, there was this 100 women that actually started coming to CAWES that we had never seen before. And they were very tied into the urban area, and moving, relocating, or even housing might not have been something necessarily that was a fit for them. So our outreach needs actually became very different from what we were used to. The board of directors, so early on when we had signed up for the Open Door project, it was kind of really like, you know, a snowball going downhill very fast. So there was a point in time when the board of directors actually was, they had a grasp on what the concept was, but not necessarily the complete impact of change on the organization. So it's really important if you are doing this change to constantly, not, you know, especially if your board is governance, you definitely don't want them in the operation, but constantly just kind of updating them on the large, higher level perspective of things, but just making sure that your scope is not going outside of your actual agency objectives and your mission, vision, and values. So we actually had to do a revision of mission, vision, and values for CAWES, and we also too had to really look at the scope of CAWES services, because at one point in time the pendulum with the spectrum was kind of shifting to the point where it was seen by others that we were no longer a violence against women shelter or domestic violence shelter, and we were more around homelessness and poverty shelter. So it is about connecting with the client experience and the staff experience, and then also to, I always use the analogy of flying on a plane, so checking in with the board, air traffic control, just to make sure that you are taking the plane to where it needs to be. Same said for community partners and community feedback. Early on with the evaluation framework, we had set aside a steering committee. Because you're so heavily invested in this work and the day-to-day emotional component, the live coaching, and just the needs, the shelter becomes very resource need intensive from a staffing model and client model. We weren't able to keep that connection with the steering committee the way we would have liked. So the way that the community actually experienced the change for our shelter was they felt very isolated, perhaps alienated, and it actually caused quite a bit of significant tension in relationships. And then also too, we ended up creating relationships with different agencies. Tasha, you might want to step in here. Sorry, I get a little excited sometimes. Sorry.
Good. I think the key for us in all of what Rand's highlighting is just to be aware of the ripple effect, because what we found out very quickly was that one small shift or change in one area quickly turned into change in a lot of areas that staff wasn't prepared for or wasn't anticipating. So when Rand makes reference to the number of women that were accessing programs or accessing services with the organization, but not the residential program, that was largely due to a shift in departure policy. And where previously women would be asked to depart if there was an issue with something that had gone on in-house, and then we're essentially limited in contact with the shelter from then. With our new policy, we tried to maintain engagement, but what that turned into was a volume of women that we really struggled to serve. It was not uncommon to have 5 or 6 women at a time show up and need everything from, you know, basic needs to hygiene products, a shower, a sleep, things like that. And we didn't have, we hadn't prepared that with the additional staff required to do that. So I guess that's the biggest piece I would reinforce, is to really do the changes incrementally so that you can try to balance some of that ripple effect. That would be my suggestion.
Okay, and then go on to our final slide. So our lessons learned. I feel like this slide could be much bigger. But our lessons learned is just we really truly underestimated the magnitude of the change. And like I said, like there wasn't one aspect of our organization, like even to our community garbage container out in the back. Every single aspect of the organization was under, you know, some type of learning or evaluation, where we actually had to look at, okay, like how can we serve the women to the best of our ability? And it did take a toll financially on the organization. When we joined the Open Doors project, unfortunately, there wasn't any supplemental funds to go along with that. So the organization CAWES, we had absorbed all of the costs around the transformation. And there were times when we were really experiencing high volumes around taxis, bus passes, our food budget very, very quickly really soared. And, you know, they were things that had we had that pre-planning piece that I spoke about, I think we could have prepared better for. But once we literally opened the doors, we were like open the doors and in the storm very quickly. Also, too, just for a little bit of context, because I forget sometimes that not everyone may be familiar with Red Deer, but Red Deer is a small city in central Alberta. We have about 100,000. We're in between Edmonton and Calgary. But during this time as well, we were dealing with an opiate crisis in our community as well. So very quickly, the context of the work that CAWES was doing and the context of the work that we were doing in our shelter sector had changed very dramatically. Around connection with connecting top down and bottom up change, we did use an older style of change management where the change would actually be experienced by the staff as management top down, giving direction around the change. We did consult with our researchers, and they did identify that we should do a change maker, you know, someone in the organization or staff in the organizations that would advocate for the trauma-informed transformation, and also 2 summer projects. To be completely honest, we were so consumed in the needs of the organization, we didn't have the time or the space or the resources to put into those investment pieces, and that was a very critical mistake. When staff are not part of the change, giving expert voices, then the feeling is, you know, can feel very isolating, alienating, and it honestly caused quite a bit of conflict in our organization. And if I could go back to the past, that's something that I would have liked to have changed.
Ryan, you
yep.
just have about 2 or 3 minutes left.
Okay, and then Tasha, if there's anything more you'd like to say. I feel like I'm talking too much, I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. I think just in closing, one of the most important pieces is to really look at, I mean, the biggest learning for us, I think, was just in that constant push-pull. So you're dealing with resistance from staff, but also then there's a real magic in the work that we were doing as well, and pieces of that being you know, so it's constantly the resistance, and then looking at how the women are resilient and how they experience the shift in service delivery. It's just a really difficult balance to strike. And so just to highlight the magic of this, one of the biggest things that we learned from this project is just how important transparency is, and to see the shift that happened with following practice, a shift in practice where there was that honest, open communication, where there was the ability to plan for things. So safety plan around emotional safety, and planning around substance use or consumption. All of those pieces became a part of the day-to-day interactions, and so the focus was very much still on safety, but there was a larger scope, and there was the opportunity to have those really honest conversations, which I think really enhanced our ability to work with and support women as well. So.
I agree wholeheartedly, Tasha, and that's exactly it. Because when you're going through this framework and you're thinking, okay, you're tired, you're exhausted, you're putting about 60, maybe 80 hours in a week, if not more. But that's really about the change that you want to see. It's that magic that happened. And I think everyone can agree that they saw that CAWES staff and our service delivery model really changed how we interacted with the clients. We did end up actually having to go back and to look at capacity, and I did have to make difficult decisions around capacity. And I do recognize wholeheartedly that that did end up actually really lifting a barrier, or not lifting a barrier, sorry, creating a barrier. So we were low barrier, and now I would say probably we're like mid barrier. But it was just around resources. We didn't have the resources to continue. However, going back to community partnerships, there now actually is a like a drop-in program actually for women in our community that helps with showers and lunches and all of those things. So we were able to build bridges that way. And I think, unless you have anything else to add, Tasha, I think that concludes our presentation.
Yeah, we're good.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Rayan and Tasha. That was wonderful. And I see we have received a few questions already, which is fantastic. We're going to keep those till the end and answer all the questions at once. If you do have questions coming to mind, though, feel free to put them in there. Keep putting those questions in so we're ready to go at the end. I am just going to answer one question now because it's come in a few times, just about whether we're able to share the PowerPoint presentations afterwards. And so we can do that. I'll speak with the presenters and we'll kind of arrange something there. And I will do my best to see if we can get them translated as well for those of you who are listening in French today. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Erin.
Thank you. Let's just get my screen share here. Great. Well, thank you very much. My name is Erin, and I'd like to start by thanking Women's Shelter Canada for asking me to present today on harm reduction and trauma-informed practices in a transition house setting. Just a little bit about myself is I've been with Atira for about 13 years and the program manager for Shamai House for the last 8 years. I'm committed to Atira for many reasons, but primarily because Atira believes having a representative staff is the most important action an agency can take to make its services accessible. So this also informs our hiring policy.
Erin, sorry.
Allows us.
I'm just going to jump in quickly. If you can just make sure you're speaking kind of at a pace that the translator will be able to keep up with for French. So just remember to do that. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry about that. So this informs our hiring policy and allows us to value education and professional experiences as well as lived experiences. Just a bit about Atira. Atira is a non-profit organization committed to working to end all violence against women through direct services. It's also as working to increase the awareness of education around the scope and impact of our communities of men violence against women and children. Atira's mission is dedicated to supporting women and children affected by violence, by offering safe and supportive housing, and by delivering education and advocacy aimed at ending all forms of gender violence. Of course, our vision is a world free of inequalities, where everyone's human rights are respected and where women and girls have the right to participate fully and effectively in all of its decisions that affects their lives. Some of Atira values include inclusive feminism, which is informed by our understanding that women's experiences of oppressive institutions are interconnected and cannot be examined separately. We also are very woman-centered, which also informs our understanding that In addition to providing safety and respect to all of the programs, we invite and encourage women to have the opportunity to actively participate in all of the services. Of course, our biggest one is the harm reduction, and that informs us by our understanding that women's experiences of gender-based violence is central to their use of substance use, and that the understanding the intersections between women's experiences of violence and poverty and racism are seamless, and which increases the opportunities for women to keep themselves and their children safe. For Atira, we're really big on the woman-centered and the harm reduction. One of our philosophy is a practice is centered on all of our beliefs of oppression are interconnected. And we believe the role of a support worker is defined by the following beliefs. Women are experts in their own situations, and decisions whether to make or changes in their lives are theirs alone. Women who have experienced trauma have developed skills and strengths to cope with their situations. Our role is to acknowledge, validate, and attempt to add to these skills and strengths, not to judge the women for the coping skills they've developed, and not to see women as helpless and in need of being rescued. As I mentioned, the primary role for a support worker is to address the issues that arise as a result of their experiences, to support her right to access fair and relevant information in effort to assist her in deciding whether to not to make changes in her own life. I'll just talk a bit about Shamai. Shamai is a 6-bedroom house in Surrey. The program is staffed 24/7 with 2 support workers per shift. As well, we have a drug and alcohol counselor available to the women. Shamai opened up in 1997 for women who were struggling with substance use. And Shamai is a first staged harm reduction, no barrier transition house. So what that means is we do not have barriers for women to access the program. So we don't have a screening process. For Atira, it's just about building relationships with women to find out what appropriate services we can refer her to in the communities and what support she's interested in accessing. Women are experts in their own situations and decisions, whether or not to make changes in their lives, and changes are their own to decide. As I mentioned, our role is to validate and attempt to add to their skills and strengths they developed, and to provide a safe and supportive environment. We know that women who struggle with substance use don't have many options to go to because they're not fleeing that immediate partner violence, but yet there's some of the most vulnerable women to violence. We also don't have like what we say rules. We have guidelines for the program. So Shamai doesn't have a curfew. We don't have a lights out time. It's just women are welcome to come and go as they need. Atira also provides support rather than counseling or therapeutic programming. So we don't keep detailed notes on day-to-day activities at the program, nor do we keep written details about women's situations, conversations, or disclosures. And with that, it's because if she is fleeing her partner and she might be in a bad situation and could be accessing our services, we don't want to add more harm by having so much detailed information. And we're also mindful of the languages that we use. So for us, we use the word woman instead of you calling them clients or residents or any kind of clinical jargons. I think what makes Shamai unique is the length of stay. So typically transition houses would have a length of 30 days. And honestly, at one time, Shamai was the same. We found that 30 days was not enough time for someone that is struggling with multiple barriers, such as trauma and substance misuse and chronic homelessness. Really 30 days is barely enough time for someone to really settle in. So now what we've done is we've have a length of stay at Shamai for 6 months. And therefore women are able to rest from the streets, the trauma, and the street violence. Once a woman settles in, the staff will build a rapport with her and see what kind of supports and resources staff can provide to her. It's really the woman's choice of what she gains from her stay at Shamai. But over the years, Shamai saw a huge increase of women just showing up at the door in crisis. And some of these women just needed some, advocacy, food, maybe a shower, some emotional support, or just to pick up some harm reduction supplies, or really just had nowhere else to go. Here at Shamai, we don't turn women away because they're not staying at the program. Instead, we support the woman with her immediate needs. If staff couldn't find her a shelter bed, the woman would sleep on the couch until the next day, and then the daytime staff would continue trying to find her a place to go. And back in April 2016, a public health emergency was declared in BC due to the opiate crisis and the overdose fatalities. And the way that Shamai responded to that was that we evolved due to the needs of the women in the community, and in response to the opiate epidemic that we're facing today. Shamai provides a non-judgmental space for what we call an overdose prevention site. So women are able to use their substance in a safe environment. All of the staff here are trained in naloxone, so they're able to respond to an overdose. Because of the overwhelming amount of women needing the services of Shamai, we decided to dedicate staff to what we now call our drop-in, which is just in the back of the house. The staff there will work with women with their needs and provide resources. And the women are welcome to take a shower, access donations, or store their belongings in bins. We also provide lunches, snacks, and hot meals at times. And each day, the drop-in staff will have a new topic for discussion and education around survival sex work, safe using, living with hepatitis C or HIV, as well on how to keep themselves safe during the pandemic. Women are also just welcome to hang in the back of the yard under our gazebo if they just need a safe place to get away from the streets. So it's not a typical transition house where nobody can access. If somebody is in need, we'll do our best to support that person and connect her with the resources. Also at Shamai, we do have harm reduction supplies that are accessible for the women. And staff have conversations with the women about reducing the risk. So it's about building relationships with women in order for them to tell us what's going on, and so that we're able to connect her with other resources in the communities. One of the things that we do ask for women is not to use in their rooms, but in a designated using area. So the staff can keep an eye on them and respond if needed. So everything is kind of monitored here. Just from my experience, if programs offer harm reduction supplies, they don't offer a safe place to use their substance, I think this kind of puts the women at a high risk. As well, women will often use alone or in secluded areas, or possibly even hide the fact that she is using, which this puts them in a higher risk of overdose or possibly being with somebody that is unsafe. I think where we can continue to grow is, as I mentioned, although BC continues to lead in the harm reduction services, we still have a long ways to go. I think we need to have more 24-hour services to support women. We need to break the stigma around the substance use, and provide women the opportunity to access available all service regardless of their choices in life. And of course, we continue to pursue funding opportunities, and we listen to the women that we serve in hopes of filling in those service gaps, and providing women additional safe, affordable, supportive housing. So part of this is to break down the stigma of women's use and kind of getting down to how can we support her with her choices in life, without any judgment. That's really all I can say for that. It's just a huge need for more low barrier to no barrier programming for women.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erin. That was really informative. So we do have quite a few questions that have come in, which is awesome. So I will just sort of start going through those, and we'll fit in as much as we can before the end of the session. We've had a few questions, so I'll sort of combine them together, but a few questions around, are there also children in this space, like in your shelter or your transition house? And if so, how do you kind of balance that, that dynamic where there might be women who are using or have used, and there's children in the space, and just keeping sort of everyone safe in that environment and balancing the different needs there? Maybe I'll pass that to Rayanne and Tasha first, and then Erin, if you want to weigh in, you can.
Hi, so at our shelter, yes, we do actually have children as well. Our mandate is women and children fleeing abuse, women fleeing abuse, women in crisis, and other. So we noticed when we first started Open Doors an influx of single women, and that really became like our main, our main clientele during that time. Like, we did see a reduction in children, and I know that community agencies were very concerned with the shelter, because previously, and I forgot to mention this in our presentation, previously, if you were using any type of substances, you would be asked to leave CAWES. And now we were working with women while they were staying. Unfortunately, they weren't able to use on site, but we were working with them around harm reduction and all of those pieces. So there was a tremendous amount of concern from community around children in the environment. For the most part, we saw that the women, all of the women, had a vested interest in keeping children safe and following the rules. And the rules that we had was around safe, respectful environment and zero consumption on site. So our departures happened very quickly if those rules were not followed. Since we had to reduce capacity, we've actually noticed an influx in women and children coming in. But I'm very interested to see what Erin has to say on that.
Well, Shamai, we do not have children on site, although some of our other programming do have children. And it's not that there's open using in front of children, it's about making those safety plans. So it doesn't make a mom a bad mom if she chooses to use, she just needs to come up with a safety plan. So finding a safe babysitter, whatever that looks like. But no, there's no open using in front of children. It's about being honest and, making that plan for, to go out for the evening. So yeah, there's just no using in front of children.
Great, thank you. So I think we had another question about whether women are allowed to use in the house. And so I think, Erin, you've maybe answered that for Shamai. Do you want to add anything to that?
Using in the house, we just make the environment fairly comfortable. So it's a living room setting with vinyl kind of furniture. So it's able to be wiped and disinfected. Women are very comfortable using in the room there. And again, I can't stress enough, it's about building those relationships with the women. Once you start making women feel comfortable and not judging them for the amount they're using, they start to share more stuff with you and respect the environment that they're in.
Yeah, and I think just important to add for us as well, we did install lockers at the front of the shelter and asked that if there was any paraphernalia, even harm reduction supplies, that those were locked up. And we had very good success with that. The women were very open about that.
Great, thanks. So maybe I'll pose the next one to Rayanne and Tasha. Someone is asking just around, particular security measures you might have in place for women who, they have experienced domestic violence, and so there are safety concerns. Is your address confidential? How do you kind of manage the coming and going? Just balancing all those different components with your approach.
You can start with that one, Rayanne.
Okay. So we do, like, when clients come in to use our service, we do danger assessment, and also we're looking at safety planning, risk management. When we started Open Doors, we did increase security on site. So we have a security firm that we're working with in town, and they do, like, however many drive-bys we need them to do. They actually drive by the property, scope out the property, and actually come in and talk to the crisis workers on shift to make sure everyone's doing fine. So regularly, when there's not an identified risk, they're usually here 2 times a night. We can go up to 8 to 10 times a night, or stationary security if that's an issue. We do have cameras here at the house. We're also connected into a high-risk collaborative criminal justice response within the city of Red Deer. So what we can do is we can take basically the client's information and file basically to our high-risk case conference, which includes CFSA, our CMP, probation, then our DV court team, and then our DV support workers and treatment program. And what will happen is they will go through and they'll look at risk management strategies, and the onus of that table is offender accountability, and also, of course, paramount, victim safety. So we do utilize our supportive network as well. And then we do have a GPS system. So we have about, I think we're up to 50 buttons now, personal alarms that we can lend out to women, and they can use them. And typically it's more for our outreach clients who aren't actually staying in the shelter, but when they press the button, it goes right to emergency response, so police, and then the police can attend and they can find out where they're at in the geographical area. But we try as much as possible to do safety planning. And the beautiful thing is, since we did start Trauma Informed and Open Doors, there's a transparency piece. There's a huge part of the women's story I don't think that we ever got before, because we were too busy policing them and policing their experience in shelter. And now there's actually open conversations that are happening about what safety looks like for them. And as Erin said, like, women are experts in their own lives, and as much as possible, we try to work with them.
Even around that piece with the women specifically, safety planning around, who is it that you identify as your supports? How do you want us to proceed if you don't come back within the time frame you've given us? And that wasn't something that we asked for any longer, but it was something that was really became a part of safety planning as things evolved, because we oftentimes would have women come in to safety plan around what was happening that evening, or just the transparency piece, or calling to check in with shelter and ask that they communicate, they continue to communicate with them. So the safety planning changed in that sense, and also around, the emotional safety piece as well. But the transparency was incredible. Even around things like connection with, or still continuing to have contact with the abuser, and the ability to safety plan. What we recognized was the ability to safety plan is incredibly enhanced when you actually have the whole story. And so one of the things we noticed from the past was that there's a lot of policy, a lot of procedure that we were following, but we were just ticking the boxes, right? It wasn't individualized. It didn't meet the women where they were at, or necessarily their needs, or even address the biggest risks or concerns that they identified. So that was really phenomenal.
Great. So we have a lot of questions coming in, which is fantastic, but we have less and less time. So I'm going to try to go through these, pick out the ones that, maybe we haven't touched on those things yet. And I'm going to put them to a specific person. And if we can try to keep the answers short and sweet, and that way we'll get through as many as possible, hopefully. So for CAWES, someone asking, do your overnight staff work alone other than the security check-ins?
No, so we always have 2 staff on, and we also have 2 team leads as well that are available for after hours.
Great, thanks. So I'll pass the next one to Erin. There's someone asking whether you test the drugs before they're used by the women.
So there isn't a testing space here at Shamai. We can direct them to Safepoint, which is just down the road in Surrey, and they do test the substance there.
Great. And for Erin as well, so you spoke, I think you mentioned there's sort of a designated room where people can use. Can you talk a little more about that in terms of the setup? Can anyone walk in? How do you monitor that space? Are there cameras? Yeah, just a bit more about that.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Shamai is just a basic house. So our using room is upstairs. So there's 2 living rooms. One of the living rooms is a sitting area with some couches and some televisions. The other space, which is over by the dining room area, it has one of those like doors that kind of shut off to the kitchen area, but it's just set up like a living room. So we have a couple of seats, some tables, some lamps and all the gear. So when I say gear, I mean the safety supplies that they need to use their substance. So it looks like a regular room.
Great. And I'll pass this one maybe to Rayanne and Tasha. Have there been situations of overdoses? And if so, how do you manage that with your staff afterwards in terms of trauma debrief and that kind of thing?
Yes, we have had at probably the peak of the project, and Rayanne, you may remember specifically, but it wasn't uncommon for staff to have to administer naloxone on their shift, and that is a piece. I mean, we work to as much as possible as a team to do the debriefing, but I think this goes back to as well what Rayanne commented on, just the emotional labor, right, and the intensity of this work, and not being prepared either with the resources to be able to adequately address the needs of staff.
Can I just jump in there as well, please? So believe it or not, we don't have many overdoses at Shamai. And I believe it's because it's not that hidden using, that rushing to use. Women are able to actually listen to some music, relax a little bit, and as we say, taste a little bit. So try a little before she goes. I've noticed that when people are, rushing, scared the police coming by, the security guards or neighbors, that's when they're actually just going for it, and then they put themselves at risk. So as much as we're an overdose prevention site, we really don't see a lot of overdoses, and I really believe that's part of the reason.
Great. So I'm just going to say quickly, and then I'll go back to a question, but I'm sure some people will have to start jumping off in the next minute or two. We will share the recording of this with everyone. That was a question that came in, so you can rewatch or share with others. And when you do exit the webinar, there will be a feedback form that pops up, and we would love it if you could give us that feedback because it does help us continue to improve these webinars. So I just wanted to pop that in there as if people are starting to leave, but if the 3 panelists are okay with it, we do have a few more questions. So maybe we'll see if we can get through a few more of those in a couple of minutes. Is that okay with the 3 of you? Okay. Great. So we have a question for Rayanne, or I'll pass it to Rayanne and Tasha, whether you've had feedback from clients about being triggered from other residents using.
Yes, we have had that feedback. We don't, though. I mean, as far as being exposed to others who you mean are under, I guess, who have used, is that the question, or just sharing the environment?
I think either, but just in terms of if it's sort of triggering for someone based on their experiences to be.
We have, and we plan around that. The reality is that when one of the things that we became aware of very quickly is there's always been substance use in shelter. There's always been alcohol coming into the shelter as well. The difference is that we're transparent and honest about it, and so we can plan for those types of things as well. So yes, if there was a concern identified, I mean, we do work with the number one kind of guiding principle being everyone shares responsibility for a safe, respectful environment. And so case by case, as things come up, we tried to manage those situations so that all involved felt safe.
Great. And Erin, for you, someone asking how you get around the legalities of people using illegal drugs on site.
Well, I think being in BC helps. I, believe decriminalizing the drugs is probably important, and we don't have an issue with it. I think everybody's on board on trying to make sure people are using safely. I mean, yeah, we haven't had any concerns with it. No.
Perfect. So last question, and then we'll wrap up. And I'll just give it to Rayanne and Tasha. In terms of the safety of your staff when they're working with women who are using or other circumstances, what have you done around that, or just kind of any concerns your staff have had?
But as in, well, okay. So we have implemented lock boxes in the shelter as well. As far as staff being exposed, I mean, we use rubber gloves, right? And there's protocols and procedure for disinfecting and for safe disposal as well. But we ask that if there are paraphernalia or if there's something that shouldn't be on site or isn't safe to have on site, that those items are locked up. And so what we found was that that's what happened, right? So as far as exposure, I think we were probably more prepared for it, and that there was more transparency about what they may have with them, and then also willing to plan around safe storage for those things as well. But absolutely, it is concern, and even for housekeeping, right? And moving to low barriers, having to go into rooms where there's the potential of substance. I guess my challenge with that is that we know that those scenarios have always played out. It's not essentially as a direct result of the open doors.
Perfect. So we are a few minutes over here, so I'm going to wrap this up. I see we do have a few other questions that have come in. So what I'm going to suggest is I will take note of those questions and I can share them with our presenters afterwards. And we might be able to get you some answers by email or something like that when we're sharing information after. And we will also, in that feedback survey, one of the questions is what else you want to know on this topic. So do feel free to also mention things there, and that will help shape the webinars we plan in the future. So thank you so much, everyone who's participated today, listened in, asked those questions, as well as Rayanne, Tasha, and Erin for these really helpful and informative insights that you've shared. I think it's been a great conversation. So thank you, the three of you. Thank you to everyone listening. Thank you to our translator as well, who's been helping facilitate this the whole time. And have a great rest of your day, everyone, wherever you are in the country. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Stay safe, everyone.